Hello and welcome to Meet the Ancestor. This is Jackie Miller with the Sons of the American Revolution and the Sons of the Revolution. We're going to have three people today to talk about the genealogy back to Revolutionary War soldiers. And our first one up will be Colonel Ronald Gene Helms.
So I got interested in looking at my lineage. I discovered that I have a maternal link to a patriot as well as a paternal link to the patriot. And guess what? When I was growing up, neither my mother nor father had a clue that we had patriots in our background. They're both deceased now, so I really don't have the opportunity to tell them about this. And I have brought my brother and sister in on the lineage, and they may or may not be interested, but you all know how that goes. I'm trying to get them interested. In fact, I've offered to pay my niece's membership into DAR, and she's having to think about that somewhat. As I got involved, I worked through the Ohio SAR, and the person I was working with was the Ohio genealogist, and he said, "Now, Ron, what we find is that you ought to go the easiest route." And I didn't know what easy meant at that time, nor did I know what difficult meant at that time. But here's what I did find out in very short order. We identified that my mother's name, Cockrell, went all the way back to the Revolutionary War, went back through the Civil War, and she had an interesting background, and I wish I could tell that to her. So that was the easier route for me. And it took about 1 month after identifying Cockrell to the Revolutionary War. With my father, it took close to 2 years to get over some speed bumps. So I'm looking at 2 applicant forms, and I'm going to go with the Cockrell branch to start out first. My father was in World War II. His father was in World War I. Helm, Helms, is both a German and English name. So in doing the research, I found out that our family came from England. So my grandfather was in World War I. He was a doughboy. So you all know who he was fighting against. Well, he was in Europe killing Germans, and then he came back, and 2 years later, he went to Illinois, where he married a German. And you know, I never thought when I was younger to ask him, "Granddad, what's going on? You're killing Germans now, and then you wind up courting and marrying another one." So that will be a mystery I'll never ever get solved. But anyway, going through my mother's family, her name was Rosemary. Weren't very many of those. Her father was Bertram, who was also in World War II. His father was Lee Cockrell, and then we go to John Griggs Cockrell, which gives me, at this point, lots and lots of relatives who I had never ever known. Then we go up through Thomas Cockrell and Peter Cockrell, and I was using Ancestry, and you know, we all got to start out someplace. And so when you go to a genealogist like Jackie, you said, "Hey, Jackie, I found this on Ancestry." And he says, "Well, you and 100 other people, that ain't gonna work." So, you know, you gotta have the proofs. So when I clicked on Peter Cockrell, sure enough, it had the symbol American Patriot with the soldier. And you know, when you all get there, it's one of the happiest days when you find out that the people you've been doing research on already have been recognized. And Jane, you know who recognized the DAR.
They are. Usually that's the way it works. Because
Yeah,
we're very thorough.
well, we certainly appreciate that, because you know, none of us might be able to find out this information without the DAR. So as it turns out, his father was Presley Cockrell, and he was also in the American Revolutionary War. The Cockrells immigrated to Virginia, And so I have relatives all over Virginia. And if he's from Virginia, what does that mean in terms of the Civil War? Well, you might have some guesses. Peter Cockrell wound up as a POW. And as a POW, he wound up in the hold of a British ship, which was then shipped over to London and was in the harbor of London, where he spent 3 years. And you can imagine, if you're in the hold of a ship, what that might do to you. But anyway, he got home, found some land in Missouri, and his relatives cultivated the land in Missouri and kind of made some names for themselves. But I'll come back to Cockrell's in a little bit. I want to go over now to Helms, and that gave me about 2 years of research, because I could click on and I could find my relative, who was Major William Helm, and he was certified by DAR to be an American patriot. Well, his father as well. So the Helm family came to Virginia. They came to Virginia and then migrated to the Shenandoah Valley. Turns out that the Helm family from England was well established. As far back as I can trace it, I can go back to 1471 to Arthur Helm, and he's listed as gentleman. And then all through the line, going over all the way back to Thomas Helm, they were all gentlemen when they came. That meant that they had money. And that meant when they came to Virginia, guess what? They had plantations. And they had all the accoutrements of plantations. And you can pretty much understand what I'm telling you, but that's part of my family heritage. And I'm really not going to apologize for all that. It's kind of neat to find out that went along with being from Virginia and possibly some of the other colonies. And I'm proud of what they did. So they had money, were well established, and I'm just glad that I was able to determine all that. And going down to the Revolutionary War, to the Civil War, this is Virginia. So you're going to have fathers and sons and nephews who are Confederate and some of them who are Federal. I've got some of both, which I think is a good thing, and I'm proud to have some of both. So my grandfather Helm was Union. He was a private. He was captured by the Confederates near Cumberland, Maryland, and he also became a prisoner of war. He was taken to North Carolina, where he was in prison. He was captured in August, and he died in January of 1865. In February of 1865, that prison was liberated by the Union. So he only had maybe 3 or 4 more weeks to go if he could have held on, but he didn't. And in doing the examination, I found out that my ancestor, William Helm and Thomas Helm, had brothers who went their own way, but the way led into Kentucky. And what I found out as they went into Kentucky was there's General Helm. He was a brigadier general with the Confederacy. And I gotta say, I'm proud to have found that out. His father, John LaRue Helm, Helms, was a governor of Kentucky twice. He was a governor before the war, and he was governor after the war. Now, I don't know, you all know the history of Kentucky better than I do, but a lot of Kentuckians like the Confederacy, and a lot of Kentuckians like the Union. Well, my family liked the Confederacy. And my grandfather, who was a Confederate brigadier general, was killed in action. So I have POW and I have KIA, and it's just amazing what you can find out when you've got the right information. And honestly, I've got to thank Jackie a lot for providing that link to my history. Now, going back to the Cockrell side, I told you I had maternal and paternal ancestors to the Revolutionary War. Well, it turns out that there was a Brigadier General Cockrell for the Confederacy from Missouri. And I had known that from the Revolutionary War that the family decided to go into Missouri to pick up on the land grants. And that's what happened there. But this particular general decided that, and I find that more people don't know this, and I think that they should. But, you know, following the Civil War, there was kind of an amnesty plan given that if you were in the Confederacy, political or military, you could sign paperwork, take an oath to the Union, and become an American citizen. Well, that's what this Major General did. But following the Civil War, he wound up going into politics, and I found out that he was a U.S. Senator for 22 years from the state of Missouri. So, Jackie, again, I want to thank you for the motivation to go this route. And really didn't know prior to meeting Jackie that I had relatives in the Confederacy, nor did I know that they were brigadier generals. And I guess I'm not saying anything a lot of other people can't say, or it's possible that they simply don't know this. And it's due to the organizations that you all work with and Jackie works with that my life has been greatly enhanced. And when I get together with family, I get to tell them, well, your great-great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather was in the Confederacy, was in the American Civil War, was in the Union, and was in the Revolution. Now, going back to my first study of the Revolution in 5th grade, I didn't know any of this. When I studied it again in the 8th grade, I didn't know any of this in 11th grade, and certainly not through the university. Jackie, that's about it.
Our next guest is Louis Buzz Carmichael. He's the president of the Kentucky Society of Sons of the Revolution and the vice president of the Wheelix chapter of Sons of the American Revolution.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, good. Okay. I'm going to follow along with Colonel Helms with a little German influence. The ancestor I'm going to talk about was very creative, and he made up his own name. His born name was Charles Jacob Sigmundson Thiel. He was born in Russia, St. Petersburg, Russia. He was there because his dad was an engineer to help the Tsars build St. Petersburg. He goes back, and he was born in 1738. He goes back to Germany, where his family was from, and went to the University of Halle, where he was a student of medicine. And then he goes back to St. Petersburg after graduating, and he opens an apothecary shop in St. Petersburg. Now, while he was at the University of Halle, Frederick the Great was there running Germany, and Frederick the Great did not really think that kings and czars were omnipotent. So my great-great-great-grandfather became a liberalist, and he joined others in a plot against the government. Well, Catherine the Great didn't like this. So she sends him to Siberia as an army sergeant in 1767. And he held that until 1770. Somehow or other, he escapes from Siberia, I think via London, and ends up in Philadelphia. He landed in Philadelphia on October 23rd, 1773. And he immediately joins in a fellow that's established in the printing business in Philadelphia. And while he's in the printing business, the things started getting exciting. You had the Declaration of Independence. my great-great-great-grandfather published the Declaration of Independence the day after it was presented or signed into German. Because in Philadelphia, and here's a copy of the SR magazine, and on the cover is the translation. I guess you can sort of see that. So that's kind of exciting. He also published Thomas Paine's American Crisis. He published Baron von Steuben's Regulation for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States. And he published things in both English and German. And actually, he published a lot of things also in 4 different languages. He did join the 3rd Battalion of the Philadelphia Militia under Captain George Easterly and Colonel William Easterbrook, and took the oath of allegiance. Now, while he was in Philadelphia, the British were occupying Philadelphia. And like, as most printers in Philadelphia, they were located close to each other along N Street and 2nd Street. And the British would patrol this area and kept a very close eye on everybody's operations. During this occupation, residents and visitors were subject to searches at any time. Wishing to avoid all authorities for fear that his real identity would have been discovered, Charles had a cane. And in this cane was hollow. And he would take messages back and forth to the American patriots. So he was basically a spy. Now, when he left St. Petersburg, he was he escaped. So he didn't keep his real name, which was Charles Jacobson Sigismund Thiel. He took the first letter of each one of his names and came up with his name Sist. So his name was Charles Sist. After during the Continental times, he aided the government during the Revolution by endorsing large amounts of Continental currency. You know, the saying, it's not worth a Continental. Later, of which he was compelled to redeem. After that, he resumed business in the city where the British still were, and he established a German newspaper, and his career kind of took off, publishing. It was called the American Herald and General Advertiser. And he established a magazine called the Columbia Magazine, and published between 1781 and 1805, various religious and political works in 4 languages, and continued in the capacity as a printer, a publisher, and bookseller until his death in 1805. He married the sister of Colonel Jacob Weiss, who was very involved in as quartermaster to Washington. So that's basically my patriot that I wanted to talk about. Now his son, his picture is right behind here somewhere. I want you to meet his son. There he is. And he's in my apartment right behind me, and keeps me thinking about family history. And
Cool.
I was very blessed. I had a great aunt that let me know about family history when I was young, and it's very, very important to me. And one of my goals at getting involved with these organizations is to make it easy for my children to know that their family was involved in every war this country's ever had, and I'm proud of it. So, thank you all very much.
Our next speaker will be Jane Addams Whitehead. She's in charge of the State Society of the Sons of the Revolution as the Women Auxiliary President. and the president of the William Bates Women's Society. Jane?
Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. I have several people to talk about, but I'll just mention some names of some of my Revolutionary War soldiers, and then I'll go on to the one I'm going to talk about today. I have some gentlemen. I have a Samuel Welch. He's from Connecticut. He was a shoemaker, and he was in the Battle of Saratoga. I have Amos Poor, and I believe also that was Junior, and I think Amos Poor Senior also was in the battle. They were in the Battle of Lexington, so they were from Massachusetts. Their forefather, Samuel Poor, came over on, I can't think of the ship, it was the 7th ship over, and his name was Samuel Poor, and they helped start Newbury or Newburyport, Massachusetts. So, you know, they're in a lot of the history there, and you can find their graves, which is amazing to me since it's from the 1600s. But I also have Nathan Barnes, Charles Chin, which I'm going to talk about him a little bit, Thomas Whitledge, which according to one of the 2 books about Kentucky, I can't remember it's Perrins or the other one, that he was the first one to grow corn in Kentucky, and he did that in Bourbon County, which actually the road he did it on is about 6 miles from where I live. The other one was Burr Harrison. He was a captain and did a lot of things. He, in fact, was also my great-grandfather that I'm working on, the Zelly Reno. He was his father-in-law to be. And then Louis Renault. And then he was out of Virginia. Most of mine are from Virginia, except for Samuel Welch, which was Connecticut, the Poors, which were from Massachusetts, and Nathan Barnes, I believe, was from Maryland. So we've got a well-rounded group there, but generally most of them were from Virginia. But Zealous is kind of a different fella. Zelly Reno was, again, in the Revolutionary War, but I'm going to walk you up through to him, and that starts out with me. And like I said, I'm just a good old country girl. My favorite meal is cornbread and beans, you know. So I'm grown and raised on the farm. So it was I always wanted to have somebody that fought in the war. You see, my father was not in the service. His great grandfather was a member of John Morgan Hunt's group.
Whoa.
Yeah, he was one of those raiders. His name was John Presley Hampton Adams, and so that's where that's my Civil War on that. But I've never been able to get far enough in just the Adams name back far enough to get to the Revolutionary War. But I do have, through the sideline, through his mother, I found the Peak family, Presley Peak, married in Adams, and so that's how I got involved in that. And he came here to settle in Kentucky. He was taken along with his brother, who is memorialized over at Big Bone. I mean, not Big Bone, but Blue Licks. But supposedly they both were there, and I don't have any proof that Presley was, except for later family stories, and that's, you know, not good unless you've got proof. But anyway, they, of course, went the gauntlets. They ended up in Detroit. And the story of my grandfather is that he walked back to Kentucky. Well, he walked back to Ohio and then over to Kentucky, but that's how he got back here, and found the guy who helped working with the Indians to take him as prisoner, and he found him later, and I would have punched him in the head, I think, or shot him or something, but they became friends later. So I don't know any stories about why or how, but they did. That might say a lot for our family because we're a pretty friendly group. But anyway, So Presley Peak, and then his father, Thomas Peak. Then there's, Thomas had a daughter, Letty Peak, and she married. And so they go back to this Thomas Peak and a Letty Mosley. I'm sorry. So anyway, they end up, you follow their line, and then her line goes directly to a Major Thomas Owsley. But Major Thomas Owsley, actually, I had the woman's side of it, so I didn't have a Revolutionary War person on up in there in the male line, but I did in the female line back to Major Thomas Owsley, and he, of course, was why I'm in Jamestown, because he was a Burgess, and they met there in they had their meetings there. He was a Burgess, and so that was the seat of government, and so that's where he met. But anyway, he's character in his own self, in that he took off and he came from England, and his background is back to Edward I and Eleanor of Aquitaine, I think it's how it goes. And anyway, through him, we have a Templar knight that's known with his name. We go back to a baron, and I think his name is William Mallet. And William Mallet was one of the barons with the King John and the Magna Carta. So that's as far as I've ever been on my line. But anyway, this guy I want to talk about really is Zélie Reno. And little Zélie, he is on my grandmother's side. And so she was Veda Cecil Poor, and she married my grandfather, William Goebel Adams. But Veda's mother was Ophelia, and Ophelia was the daughter of George Washington Jones. So, you wonder, why is his name George Washington? Well, yes, he was. He was my cousin. Of course, he's probably everybody's cousin, but he was one of ours. And how the story goes with that will be part of this story. Anyway, George Washington's mother was Cynthia Reno and Marshall Jones. And I can't find much about Marshall, but Cynthia and her family and Zélie were part of the Bryan Station, part of the church. And then here in Bourbon County, up next to Bourbon County, they had a Silas Run Baptist Church, and then they ended up starting the Cooper's Run Baptist Church. So that's where they ended up at. And Zélie is buried somewhere here, but we don't know exactly where. Some people say he's buried at the old cemetery in Cynthiana, but I've never found any proof of that, although some people have come here and celebrated that he was, but I can't find it. And I've been to the courthouse and went through all the records. But Cynthia Reno, the wife of Marshall Jones, she was Zélie's mother, or a daughter. So Zélie's here, and I looked up his Revolutionary War record, and he's a character. He was a Minuteman. Some of the other gentlemen I had were actually, one was with George Washington. He signed some of his papers, but this man was a true Minuteman. He would go and be called up for 6 weeks, and then he'd go back home and work his crops or whatever he did. Pretty sure it was farming. But his idea, when I read his military record, it says that he wore a purple hunting shirt with the words on it sewn in. It's kind of like "Give me liberty" or "Give me death," but it's not. It's similar to that, and I've drawn a blank. But his record is very interesting, and he's been back through Burr Harrison, etc. And his claim to fame really is that he became a sergeant, and he oversaw the prisoners at the Battle of Yorktown. So I had the Yorktown pin from the DAR. His line goes back to his great-grandfather came over from France and England because he was a Huguenot. And they came, and England, the King George, I think it was, settled them in the colony of Virginia in a little place called Mannequin, and it's where the Mannequin Indians owned that, but they deserted the place, so they say. So I don't know if it was deserted or the English troops made it deserted. But Mannequin right now is just outside of Richmond, Virginia, and so it's very interesting. I belong to the Daughters of that association. The Mannequins Huguenots are a little bit different in that we settled as a group, and that the land was given to us rather than being sent to New York or, other Mannequins or other Huguenots. But their religious fervor was no different. It was still very strong. So that's where Zélie came from. And I have followed the Renaults way back to France and found some very interesting things. During the time of one of the kings, I don't have all that memory anymore, but in one of the kings, it was the one that did the Edict of Nantes, N-A-N-T-Z, which declared that if you weren't Catholic, you have to either turn Catholic and stay Catholic, or we will decide to kill you. So he was one of those who escaped, and before it became worse. But one of the Renaults was part of that king who made that edict. He was one of his treasurers or something to that order already. And I found that out because I was watching one of those movies recently, and it was about the king and his romance with his wife and whatever, and it was so pretty and everything. And then they talk about this Reno guy comes in, and I'm like, nah, can't be, not possible. But when I looked up all of my information about him, he is one of the gentlemen that's part of the family. So, but apparently he wasn't really Catholic, because I believe that he came as well. But our original ancestor there was Louis Renault. So anyway, that's kind of a flashing history of some important people, but some of us don't have that anymore as well as they do, but I don't think we have the opportunities that they have as well. And then I'm so proud of the patriots that settled our country, that without them, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have the freedoms that we have. We would not have the family that we have. I don't think the Zélie Renault's family through this whole country are so scattered. I mean, because you look back then, they had 10 kids, 12 kids, 15 kids, and you just keep multiplying that. And Zélie's family's all over. One of his children, her grandchildren, set up Reno, Nevada. One is famous for the Reno Elevator Company. And one of them, two of them are famous for the Reno Gang, which was famous before the James Gang. So it's around that same time. So we have them all, from good and bad, and just like all the other families do. But I am extremely proud of my patriots that gave up their life and fortunes. And most of the men who signed that Declaration of Independence, some of you may not know, but they lost everything they had. They put up their money, their homes, everything, some of them their lives. So, and I've also found that now I am related to one that signed the Constitution. And I can't remember his name, and that awful. It's through the Hales and up through that way. All branches off the pores. So anyway, thank you. And I'll just always remember that this is the greatest country in the world, the greatest civilization that was there. And we have to hold it dear. And we've got to cling on to being an American.
I'd like to thank all the guest speakers for coming and sharing their genealogy. This has been an educational program of the Sons of the American Revolution and the General Society of the Sons of the Revolution. We thank everybody for sharing their history, and our goal is to preserve our history. And I'd just like to thank everybody for doing the research they have. It's very important that we preserve our history and share it with other folks. And again, thanks for being here. And this is episode number 2.